What? It says you're live and you're recording. So let's see how these people come here. I don't want to invite them on screen. I just want to invite them in. Okay, I think we're live. If you are here, if you can pop a hello in the chat. Oh, yay. Okay, that way we know that people can actually see us. Kate and I have been hanging out for a few minutes before, so want to make sure. Hey, Erin, Nadia, Jen, Susan. Yay. Awesome. Catherine. I see. Mary Beth. Awesome. Yeah, we were just chatting about, we're really excited. There are a bunch of people that were interested in this topic, which I'm so excited about. I myself am not a copywriter, but I'm totally intrigued by, being more strategic with content and what I'm sharing. So that's a little preview of what you will see today. I'm so excited to welcome Kate Cooper here, who is facilitating this workshop for us, the Rebelle community. And Kate is here in Richmond, as am I. And we actually met through mutual friends, like way back.
Yep.
And have recently reconnected. And so Jalinda, Kate, do you know Jalinda? Probably.
Sure do. I sure
Jalinda
do.
knows all the cool people. So, and Jalinda, I would think this is right up your alley. I know any kind of like creativity and then also looping in the marketing piece is always really, really great. So I'm trying to stall for time a little bit because I want to give people time to join. And I'm trying to think what story I should tell about me and Kate. I don't know. I can tell the way that we actually did meet. Tara. Kate recently did a rebrand. Oh yeah. Language Arts I love. I think this brand is like
Thank you.
Great. So that's really exciting. I didn't know that. Yeah, so I had this party basically a couple years ago that I invited people that I was thankful for. And I asked them to invite people that they were thankful for. And so one of my dear friends, Chris, invited Kate. And so like our first meeting was in this really nice touchy-feely party, basically, that was just like friends and people that support one another. So that's always a good starting note to meet someone in that scenario.
Yeah, unlike an auspicious beginning.
Or, the grocery store. But yeah, we've got 18 people with us. We've got about 28 people that we expected or that registered. Just so that everyone knows, if for any reason you do have to jump off early, we are recording this session. I was telling Kate as well that we're still kind of figuring out Crowdcast in regards to how the recordings will be saved and available. But anyone that's here that is already a member of the Rebelle community will be sending out specific links for you to see all of the workshops that we've hosted virtually. And if you're not a member, we'll have a new way for you to engage with us pretty soon so that you'll also be able to have access to replays of workshops. So yeah, I feel like, I don't know, 103, is that long enough? Should we
we can get started. Sure.
Awesome. Well then, Kate, I'm going to let you take it away. I'm going to try to get my face off this screen so people can just see you and this really awesome deck that you put together for us. So thank you so much for being here. Make sure before we go that you let everyone know how they can get in touch with you after this. So
Will do.
Yep. Part of your pitch, but I want to make sure people can find you.
Will do.
All right, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Shannon. I really appreciate that. And thanks to Rebelle for hosting these great webinars. I've been endlessly impressed over the last few weeks by small business owners and the way that they have pivoted given the insane circumstances we're all living under. And speaking of those, I want to explain my current situation. So my new home office is a dark corner of the basement. My husband and I are both working from home full time, and I have a middle schooler, a high schooler, and a college student all doing distant learning. And my current situation, if you're an Office fan, you may remember the Michael Scott Paper Company episode where Michael and Pam and Ryan were all working in the basement right beneath the bathroom plumbing. I'm in the same situation. So I put a Post-it note on the upstairs bathroom asking everyone to find a different one to use. And hopefully we won't hear a whoosh of water, but if we do, I apologize ahead of time. That's what it is. We're all just doing the best we can. So thanks for coming again today. I really appreciate everybody being here. As Shannon said, I'm Kate Cooper, and I'm the founder of Language Arts, a content design agency. For years, I was a magazine writer and editor, but as the magazine industry shrank and digital content grew, the role of the writer really began to splinter and evolve. And that's something that's really happened over, the last 20 years, basically, since the dot-com bubble of the 2000, basically. I first heard the term content designer in 2015, and that's what I've really labeled myself as since then. So what exactly is content design? Content design is the practice of creating user-centered content informed by research and testing. So if you're new to this idea right now, that probably doesn't sound all that different than magazine writing, but by the end of this webinar, I hope that you'll be able to appreciate how a content designer thinks differently from a copywriter or a reporter or any other kind of writer. I like to explain it this way. Basically, writing is a form of design. So the words you use and how you use them are just as much a part of the user experience as the visual elements are. So to be clear, photos, infographics, videos, those are all also content. And there are plenty of times when the visual content should be doing the heavy lifting. But this webinar focuses on written content. So right now, again, in these extraordinary circumstances, we're just drowning in content. So there's never been a better time to start being really purposeful about the content that we use. Today, we're going to go through 10 rules. And they're not necessarily the only 10, they're just the 10 that I think are the most helpful and the easiest to teach in this format. And hopefully these are rules that you'll be able to apply to all different types of content. So content design principles apply to all kinds of things. They apply to website content. That's a pretty obvious one. This is an example of really well-designed coronavirus-related content from the state of California. If you can't appreciate how well done it is right now, my hope is that by the end of this webinar, you'll be able to look at this and say everything they're doing right. But if you take a quick look, there are these do's and don'ts, super clear. They use these very active verbs. It's this on the right there, they've got all these call to actions, right? Apply for disability benefits, get help for small businesses. It's so clear, it's so easy to understand. So kudos to California. You can apply content design to automated messages. Here's an example of a great message that I received from Harvest. I don't know if any of the rest of you use Harvest, but I canceled my subscription recently. It's a time tracking and invoicing tool, and it just didn't have everything I needed, so I canceled. Well, then I got this message, and it explains everything I needed to know about where my content would be and how long I'd be able to see it. It told me exactly what to expect. It was friendly, it was helpful, and it was so well done that I seriously considered not canceling my subscription after I got it. You can apply content design to push notifications. So here's a great one. Some of you may have received from Lyft about having a driver who is deaf or hard of hearing. Really well done, very simple, very straightforward. You can even apply content design to product labels. Look at how well designed this pharmacy bottle is. There aren't any pictures here. It's only words, but it's really well designed words. And we're going to talk about why later. But before we get into the tips, I want to say a few words really quickly about plain language. Plain language is at the heart of content design. Plain language is communication that your audience understands the first time they read or hear it. Plain language makes your content accessible. So when you use it, you're lightening your reader's cognitive load. In other words, you're requiring less effort of them, which provides them with a better user experience. A lot of people confuse plain language with dumbing down content, and it's a real pet peeve of mine. It's not what we're doing. We're making content smarter. And in that process, you're making content easier for people with a lower level, reading level rather, to read, of course. But there's been quite a bit of research that actually shows that the higher your level of education, the more you appreciate plain language. They've done tests on this. And I've never heard anyone say that they were insulted by clarity. Like no one ever reads anything and says, oh, that was too clear, not interested, no thanks. Sarah Richards, she's sort of the godmother of content design. She explains it this way. We're not writing clearly because people are dumb. We're writing clearly because we respect their time, interest, and attention. Look, people have very little time and they have a whole lot of choices. So we want to make it easy for them to choose to work with you. Okay, another note about language. Throughout this webinar, I'm going to use reader and user interchangeably. Most of my examples are from digital content, but these tips, like I said, apply to any kind of content that you're creating. I'm also going to talk about some real businesses and companies, but this information is not just relevant to businesses and for-profits. It applies to nonprofits, higher ed, and other organizations. I'm going to call out a few companies by name, some in flattering ways, some in unflattering ways. I'm including some of my own clients, including CA Human Services and a former client, Dominion Energy. I'm not trying to pick on them. In fact, I applaud them for recognizing the importance of content design and investing in help from a professional. That's pretty progressive. So those are my favorite types of clients. It comes down to this. In 2020, basically, content is a business asset. So my hope is that these 10 tips will help you start treating it like one. All right, tip number 1. Oh, and just for sort of organizational purposes, I'm going to stop after a few tips and see if anybody has any questions. So I unfortunately can't see a chat right now, Shannon, the way I'm sharing. So maybe after we get through a few tips, I can just ask you to call out if there are any questions. All right, tip number 1, write shorter sentences. You guys have probably heard that Mark Twain quote. It goes something like, I didn't have time to write you a short letter, so I wrote you a long letter instead. And the idea behind that is that making your message succinct takes a lot of time and effort. But if you want your message to be heard, you have to do the hard work to make it short. And here's why. Researchers have actually quantified the fact that the longer a sentence is, the harder it is to comprehend. So look at these numbers. This comes from the American Press Institute. When you've got 8 words in a sentence, 100% of people can understand it. You know, the longer that sentence gets, the lower that comprehension level is, right? So you want to use short sentences, even if that means taking one long sentence and breaking it into 2 or 3 shorter ones. There's another benefit to this. Shorter sentences are also more mobile friendly, right? And we know that more and more people access the web only through a mobile device. Broadband subscriptions are declining. So when you write more economically, you're actually killing 2 birds with 1 stone. To help you see what this looks like in real life, I've taken a few overly long sentences and I'll show you how I improved them. This one came from a medical center's website. It's 18 words long, so it's not the worst offender we've seen, but we can still improve it. The before reads, the medical center's pharmacies offer services for prescriptions, prescription refills, and a variety of over-the-counter medications. All right, we can shorten that. The after reads like this. Our pharmacies sell prescription and over-the-counter medications. Boom. Super simple. Here's one from a gas company. It's 32 words long. I broke this one into 2 shorter sentences. And I don't specifically mention weatherizing, which you'll see in the before, because it's one of the tips. So it was pretty easy to shorten. Here's the before. Even though your gas bill is typically higher in the winter because your heating system is working harder, you can save money by following our energy conservation tips and weatherizing your home. 32 words. Notice it was kind of hard to read in one breath. The after, cold weather means higher gas bills, but these tips can save you money this winter. It's 2 sentences. The first one is 6 words. The second one is 8 words. It's much, much easier to understand. All right. This one's a doozy, and it brings up a really important point. Sometimes what you don't publish is just as important as what you do. So in an effort to be comprehensive, this pet rescue organization lists every place that you can get every type of pet. So we end up with a sentence that's 55 words long. Here it goes. So rather than buying a dog or puppy for sale from a dog breeder or buying a cat or kitten for sale from a cat breeder, we encourage people to adopt a dog, adopt a cat, adopt a puppy, or adopt a kitten at their local animal shelter, SPCA, Humane Society, or pet rescue group. Okay, let's take a breath. If you have to take a breath, by the way, that's a really good sign that the sentence is far too long. By the time I get to the end of it, I don't even remember what this sentence was about. It's important to remember you don't have to be comprehensive. You just have to be compelling. So here's how I rewrote it. Don't buy a pet, period. Instead, adopt one from a local shelter, SPCA, Humane Society, or pet rescue group. So 4 words and 14 words. It's much, much simpler. And this tip, this particular example reminds me of a tip that I often share. Read your work out loud, especially if you're a 1 or 2 person content team, or if you're a solopreneur creating your own content. Reading things out loud will help you spot some of these issues, the places where you need to take a pause or add some punctuation. Okay, tip number 2. Use common words. This is pretty interesting. Most people share a common vocabulary of about 15,000 words and terms. Our eyes can skip over these words because our eyes immediately recognize them. Well, not our eyes, our brain immediately recognizes them. So the more we use this common vocabulary, these 15,000 words, the more accessible our content is. Take a look at this bit of text here. Your eye jumps around while you read. And when we skip words as we read, that's called a saccade. The touch point, those little carrots, those are called fixations. And you only absorb information on the fixation, the point where your eye comes to a rest. On the jumps there, those little molehills, your brain is filling in the gaps. It's interesting that from about the age of 9, your eyes can miss about 30% of text, and your brain will still accurately fill in the context. So the more we use this common vocabulary, these simpler 15,000 words and terms that we know, the better. I've written a whole blog post that includes a list of some of the most commonly used, unnecessarily fancy words. So you can look at that on my website if you want. I'll share the website at the end. But we will take a look at a few of examples here. This example is from a news network. After Americans vote, they have a myriad of choices for where to get the returns. Okay, in my whole life, I have never seen an occasion where using the word myriad is better than just saying many, lots, or if you're feeling a little fancy, countless. It's a completely unnecessary word, and it's distracting because it's actually hard to say, which means it's also hard to read. So don't use a big word when a little one will do. After Americans vote, they have lots of choices for where to get the returns. Super simple. This is an announcement from the town of Ellesmere, Delaware. Due to the fact that there is no business to discuss, the July 23rd, 2019 Board of Adjustment meeting has been canceled. Again, anything that starts with due to is generally not necessary. We can just say because. Because we have no business to discuss, we canceled the July 23rd, 2019 meeting of the Board of Adjustment. I actually noticing that I use 2 tips here. You'll see I've got the meeting has been canceled, and then we say we canceled. We'll talk about that one later. Our last example comes from Yale University. There are a bunch of phrases that start with the word in the event of, in the amount of, in order to. These phrases add extra unhelpful words to your content. So instead of saying Yale Alert notifies the campus community in the event of an emergency, just say Yale Alert notifies the campus community in an emergency. So simple. All right, tip number 3. This seems rather obvious, but once you start paying attention, you'll see that a lot of people and organizations don't do it. Make the important stuff look important. Not all content is created equal. Remember, think back to that pill bottle. Your job as a content designer is to make the important stuff look important. You do that by creating a content hierarchy. Look at the slide here. This is the hierarchy of information that our brain imposes on content, right? Because of the colors, the size, you will read this first, and then you will read this, and then way down at the bottom in the right-hand corner, you will read this last. Let's take a look at that pharmacy bottle again. A designer named Deb Adler created this bottle for Target. It's called the ClearRx system. And the reason she did is because poor content design landed her grandmother, Helen, in the hospital. Poor Helen took medicine that was intended for her husband, Herman Adler. The bottle just said H. Adler. The story of this redesign is a fabulous case study, and you can watch the designer give a TEDx talk about it. Just Google Deb Adler TEDx RVA. She actually gave the speech right here in Richmond, and she's a great storyteller, so I won't go into all of it. But let's notice a few things about the content hierarchy here. The name of the medicine is nice and big, right? You've got a bunch of bottles in your medicine cabinet. They all look pretty similar. So which one is which? So the name of the medicine is big and it's highlighted in blue. The instructions are in a nice big font. The patient's name is up at the very top. And then things like the quantity of pills, the doctor's name, the less important information is smaller and comes lower in the hierarchy. These small changes can make a really big difference. Of course, not all poor content design will land someone in the hospital, but poor content design can frustrate your customers. And when you frustrate your customers, you make it easier for them to do business with someone else. So here are two examples. If I go to J.Crew to return something, which I always do because things never fit, I have to scroll through all these paragraphs in this text before I get to this tiny little inline link that enables me to start the return process, which is also such a strange phrase. Every time I see this, I think, why isn't there just a great big juicy button at the top that says, return something or start your return if they insist on using those words? If I visit Dominion Energy because I lose power, I have to scroll what we call below the fold, pretty far down to this button that says report and check outages. Now, to be fair to Dominion, if there's a widespread outage, they usually have a banner across the top that you can click on. But if there's construction nearby or a tree falls in your yard and you're one of the few people without power, you still have to work pretty hard to find that button. It's not colored differently than the other ones. It doesn't stand out in any way. As a content designer, you have to arrange the individual pieces of content in such a way that the entire content experience makes sense. So again, you have to sort of step back and look at the whole page and think, is this hierarchy correct? I'm going to show you some examples of where it's actually done well. Here's one from Pinterest. These are directions for creating a pin from your own photo rather than just using one from your Pinterest feed. There's a clear hierarchy here, right? There's a very big title, so you know you're in the right spot. There are these numbered instructions, which makes them easy to follow. You can go back and forth without losing your place. And it ends with a resource for additional help. There's no confusion. There's no dense block of text, of content to wade through to get to what you really need. Here's another one from FrameBridge. They offer a service where they take your photos and memorabilia and they'll design a gallery wall for you. So if you look at this, they clearly label it's the gallery wall service. They give you a quick description. They offer a clear call to action. That's that big yellow button that says get started. And then they offer you the fine print of what you get for $199. Again, the hierarchy makes sense. Your brain can quickly digest it. It's really, really well done. All right, before we move on to tip number 4, let's pause here. Does anybody have any questions about these first 3 tips?
I have one question for you
Yes.
from Cassandra.
Okay.
She said, regarding common words, sometimes the more unusual word is more precise or more accurate. So what do you do then? Opt for the more vague word or the more accurate?
So I think it's depends on the situation, Cassandra. I think we're going to talk about jargon later, and you may be talking about a very technical term or a very specific term that there isn't a simple synonym for. And that's fine if you have to do that. If precision is really important, you can use that more technical term or that more precise term. Just make sure that you then define it using very plain language. And that's where those common terms and phrases come in.
That is the only one that we had right now.
Okay, great.
If anyone else wants to pop a question in, there actually is a way you can do that, not just in the chat, but in the bottom. And then at the next pause, I will read it.
Perfect. Thanks, Shannon. All right, we'll go to tip number 4. Use the first and second person. So there are some exceptions to this, but in general, You should use the first person when talking about yourself or your company. So the first person is me, the speaker. So I'll say I or we, depending on the situation. And you use the second person or you when you're talking to your reader or user. The second person is my audience, right? So let's look at a few before and afters to help it make sense here. When you talk about yourself in the first person rather than in the third, you're removing a corporate veil. The bigger your company, the more important this is, right? It gives your content a sense of ownership and a sense of authenticity. There are some exceptions, but in general, this is what you're going for. So here's an example from Virginia Natural Gas. Virginia Natural Gas has undertaken a variety of initiatives to improve and expand infrastructure in underserved Virginia communities. The way they've written this, they're not even really giving themselves credit for what they're doing, which is investing in infrastructure in communities that often get ignored, right? And the other thing is that we, the readers, have to work way too hard to even understand what they're saying. So it's a really simple fix. We just say, we are improving and expanding infrastructure in underserved Virginia communities. It feels much more personal. It feels much more authentic, and we kind of admire them more when they say it that way. Here's an example from Virginia's Department of Social Services. And this one actually illustrates how to use both first and second person point of view. So these programs assist citizens as they transition from dependency on public assistance programs to self-sufficiency. Again, I would have to read that 4 times to get it. You have to remember that your content often replaces face-to-face interaction. So if we think of our content as a form of customer service, it's a conversation that we're having with our potential clients, our customers, or our citizens. So we want to talk directly to them. So what we would say instead is, our programs help you transition from public assistance to financial independence. Super simple, so much more clarity. Again, no one ever complained that something was too clear. And here's a pretty straightforward example from higher education. Our admissions department invites prospective students to tour the university campus. Why not just say, we invite you to tour our campus? It's a much nicer invitation in my mind. All right, tip number 5. This may be the trickiest rule we're going to cover today. So it takes some paying attention and it takes a lot of practice. Oh, I should have read the rule. Let me go back. Sorry. We want to avoid hidden verbs. So what is a hidden verb? We hide verbs when we turn them into nouns or when we put a to be verb in front of them, okay? And we're gonna look at some examples. So we wanna find that verb and put it with the subject at the very beginning of the sentence. And when we do that, we create sentences that are shorter, more dynamic, and easier to understand. And it makes a huge difference. It's subtle the first time you see it, but it really makes a difference. So with this first example here, the verb is hidden by a to be verb. It is also highly recommended to clean your wedding dress soon after your big day to avoid further settling of stains in the fabric. Okay, do you guys see the to be verb? It's the word is. All right, so when we hide a verb, the subject is often missing altogether. So in this case, we think it is highly recommended by whom? Here, it's Puritan Cleaners. It's their website. So Puritan Cleaners is making this recommendation. If we rewrite this, we let Puritan demonstrate their expertise, right? By having an opinion. So we rewrite it to say, we recommend that you clean your wedding dress as soon as possible to prevent stains from settling into the fabric. Okay, the way that's rewritten, now they sound like an authority on this topic. They sound like someone you'd actually trust to clean your wedding dress. And that's, often with content, that's what we're doing. We're demonstrating our expertise. We're expressing an opinion. We're showing them that we're expert enough, we're experienced enough to make a recommendation. So again, first person makes a huge difference. This one is from the Coca-Cola Foundation. There is overwhelming evidence that achieving equality and empowerment for women has broad ripple effects that are good for society. Again, we want to get the subject and the verb together at the beginning of this sentence. We want to get rid of the hidden verb that is created by the word is, another to be verb. But this idea of overwhelming evidence is also harder to read than it needs to be. So we're going to edit that too. So we'll simply say, research shows that achieving equality and empowerment for women has broad ripple effects that are good for society. So much easier to understand. This example comes from Whole Foods. The hidden verb here is in the second half of the sentence when we talk about where our products are sourced. But the first half of the sentence needs a little work too, so I'll read the whole thing. Founded in 2005, Whole Planet Foundation is our nonprofit organization that alleviates poverty in countries where our products are sourced. Okay, we'll rewrite it rather. We founded the nonprofit Whole Planet Foundation in 2005 to alleviate poverty in countries where we source our products. So again, this one is trickier, and there were two hidden verbs in there. Finding and fixing the hidden verb is really tricky. I even found one in this deck when I reread it today to get ready for this. If you find it, let me know. I'll send you a prize. But the more you practice, the more natural this becomes. So again, look for those to be verbs: is, are, was, has, and then see if you can get that subject and the verb together at the very beginning of the sentence. You're going to have a shorter, stronger, easier to understand sentence. All right, tip number 6, optimize for skimmers and scanners. This tip is based on the science of how we read digital text. All right, there's a well-known report from the Nielsen Norman Group. They're a UI, UX consulting firm. And this particular report is called How People Read on the Web. So what researchers did here is they used eye tracking technology to better understand how people consume content when it's digital specifically. So this image that you see is a heat map of what the study revealed. Most people read large blocks of unbroken text in an F-shaped pattern. So in other words, they read most of the way across the top for the top few lines, but then they read less and less as they work their way down the page. So knowing this, we have to optimize for skimmers and scanners. Skimmers are the people who read the top layer of everything, just the top layer. So they read the headlines, the subheads, the call to action. Scanners let their eyes kind of roam all over the whole page until they find what they're looking for, and then they stop to read. So they're looking for a particular word or a phone number or something like that. So when we optimize for skimmers and scanners, what we're doing is using headings, subheads, bullet points, and other ways to give content that F shape rather than doing long blocks of unbroken text. We'll look at a few examples. This is a screenshot from an old website of a client of mine. This is a page about hotels for their annual conference. I mean, look at these big blocks of unbroken text with all these hotel details just crammed in there. It's super overwhelming, and I can just imagine the frustration of being one of their attendees, trying to look at this and look at my phone and go back and forth and digest it all. But there's a really easy fix. Here's what we did. We introduced the topic of hotels in the opening paragraph, but then we move all the details into these bullet points that have a similar structure, right? A parallel structure for each hotel with clear headings and just super simple information. So now we can skim and scan the page. Unfortunately, I can't show you the reel after because we had to take the page down because they had to cancel their conference, but it looked something like this. Here's an example from the DMV. Like me, a lot of you have probably looked into getting your real ID. And when you go to the DMV, you see this incredibly confusing page. Lots of words. They halfway through where it says there are many documents, they're already sending you away to get more information because they know you're going to be confused, but they haven't even tried to explain it yet, which is very odd. And then when you look at this, bring one from this category, bring one from this category, bring two from this category, it looks like you have a choice with the categories, but you don't. You actually have to bring one from the first category, one from the second, and two from the last one. So it's really poorly done. Again, the solution is pretty straightforward. First of all, we add numbered steps. That's always great for instructions. And then we add some bullet points and even some sub-bullets. So you have to bring a birth certificate or a current US passport and a social security card or a W-2 form, plus two of the following as proof of current address. And then we give some examples there. And then finally, if you still have questions, you can go look at these other documents. But we don't send them away from the page until we've actually done a good job of explaining what they need. Here's an example that's well done from the real world. So in case you didn't know, Warby Parker now actually sells contact lenses too. That division is called Scout. We see a product description at the top, and then we see all the product benefits listed as subheads. And each of those subheads has more details, but we don't have to read the detail. We can just read the headline and the subheads and know everything we need to know about Scout lenses. They've done a really good job of optimizing this for skimmers and scanners. A quick plug for bullet points. Bullet points are great because they make lists easier to read. Sometimes people put lists in a paragraph, a long list with lots of commas. That can be very tricky. But bullet points help you read faster, make the page less dense, and emphasize the most important points without adding extra text or design elements. So, did I see what I did there? I used bullet points to explain why bullet points are so great. Having less text and fewer design elements is also more mobile friendly. So this is another twofer, like we talked about earlier. Bullets make your text more mobile friendly. All right, tip number 7, avoid jargon. Jargon is the language of technical terms used by a group or profession. So we all know lawyers have their own jargon. Parents of special needs children have their own jargon. Athletes have their own jargon. Artists have their own jargon. Jargon can be a helpful shorthand, rather, if you and your audience speak the exact same jargon. But jargon is basically the opposite of plain language. So it's pretty simple. This is what I like to explain to clients. If you want people to understand what you have to say, make it easy to understand. It's really no more complicated than that. So here are the 4 reasons we don't use jargon. We're trying to inform, not to impress. So this isn't high school English. There are no bonus points for big words. Jargon is a relative term, though. So you have to know your audience and write for them. If you're a tech consulting company, for instance, you may work really closely with other technologists, and they may use the same jargon. But if it's a business leader who's the one who signs your contracts and writes your checks, then you want to use words that she will understand, not the technologists. The third point is that jargon, again, also this goes back to the relative, jargon being a relative term. You want to conduct user research and test the language with the right audience. So again, we'll talk more about content testing later, but testing is what tells you if you're using jargon or not. And in the rare cases, like we already talked about, where you can't avoid jargon, where a very specific or precise term is necessary, just be sure to define the terms you're using. This example illustrates 2 points. It's a long one. Thanks to Bill 2467, which passed in 2011, the extension of the law with House Bill 1940 in 2015, coverage for applied behavior analysis service is required by most Virginia-based health insurance packages utilized by families for children with a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder up through age 10. Again, I have asthma. That's a really hard sentence for me to read. This text comes from FAQs, which we're going to talk about later, for an organization that works to improve the quality of life for people who have autism and other developmental disabilities, okay? There's a lot of jargon around legislation here, but there's also just too much detail. This content, believe it or not, was aimed at parents who just found out that their child is on the spectrum. Do you really think that that parent in that moment cares about which bill was passed then? They just want to know if this therapy is going to be covered. They are stressed out and overwhelmed and maybe reading this late at night after they put their child to bed. So this is another case where what you don't publish is just as important as what you do. So we rewrite it. Virginia law requires that most health insurance packages cover applied behavior analysis, ABA, for children with autism spectrum disorder up to age 10. So much simpler. Imagine the relief a parent feels when they find that sentence. And as a side note, I'll tell you, in January 2020, Virginia changed that law, and ABA is now covered, I think, up to about age 26. I'm not positive, but much, much older, which is great. This is an example from the USDA. It's their content about SNAP, which used to be the food stamp program. So imagine you're a person who needs help trying to buy groceries, another stressful situation, and yet the reader is asked to work so hard to figure out what the USDA is saying here. So the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, formerly known as the Food Stamp Program, serves as the primary source of nutrition assistance for millions of low-income people monthly. It increases food purchasing power. What does that even mean? For eligible households with benefits that can be used to buy food at authorized retail grocery stores and farmers markets across the country. Here's how I think it should read. The Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, helps millions of people buy groceries. Recipients can shop with SNAP credits at participating grocery stores and farmers markets. And then parenthetically, SNAP used to be called the Food Stamp Program. Again, I can't remember in this case if they were actually talking to the person who would be the recipient of the program, but it could also be changed again to speaking in the second person, saying you. That would be an even better improvement. This is an example that comes from plainlanguage.gov. If you're really interested in plain language, that's a great resource. If you're in the legal field, they have an entire section devoted to legal plain language, which is its own sort of special beast. But plainlanguage.gov is an agency, an actual government agency devoted to making government communications easier for citizens to understand. If you've seen our state's SCC website, which they just relaunched, you know we have a long way to go. But it's great that this organization exists and is trying. But here's the before. Apply sufficient torque to the brinulator valve control ring to ensure that the control ring assembly is securely attached to the terminal such that loosening cannot occur under normal conditions. This goes back to Cassandra's point. We can't get rid of the word brinulator valve control. We need to know exactly what they're working with, but the rest of it can be much simpler. We can just say securely tighten the brinulator valve control, attaching it to the terminal. So much simpler. All those other words are completely unnecessary. So a very quick fix. All right, before we move on to tip number 8, do we have any questions on these 3?
We do.
Okay.
Well, I don't know if it's on these 3, but it is a question. So Christy would love to know a bit about how you talk to clients about the balance between writing for SEO and writing for clarity user experience.
That's a great question. And I will honestly say that SEO is not my area of expertise, but I can also add that there is research that shows that you are optimizing for SEO by using the language your users use. So if you use, Google search terms or any of those tools to understand what your users are searching for, you want to use those words, but they're generally using plain language, like what does applied behavior analysis mean, right? They might use ABA, but then use simpler words around it. So again, you can use those words that they're insisting on using, but then make sure you define them very plainly. That also really helps. And there's one other point about SEO that I just lost. Sorry. I'll come back to it if I think of it. Yeah, but if you look, and I'm happy if you reach out to me, you've got my email at the end, I can actually point you to an article about that exact thing. And the other thing that you can also do is do content testing. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. Put content testing in front of your audience. I've done this with clients to show them, like if they're very skeptical of plain language, take something written with a lot of technical terms that's not using plain language and something that's written with plain language, test both pieces. And again, I'm going to teach you how to do that in a minute, and then share those results. Or also look at the analytics and stuff that you've already published and see where people tend to bounce or where they leave the sales funnel. And you might be able to show a correlation between language that isn't plain and losing people's attention.
Awesome. The next question and Christy says, super helpful, thank you.
Oh, good.
The next question is, how do we test language? But I think you said you're going to be talking about.
I'm going to do that next.
Okay,
yep.
Awesome. That's all we got right now.
That's all? Perfect. Okay. All right, tip number 8. This will be the most controversial tip, as controversial as content design gets. Some content designers get very worked up about frequently asked questions, and I will confess that I am one of them. There's actually a little black mug that dorky people like me carry around that says no FAQs on it, and I've always wanted it. Here's why in a nutshell. If you have a lot of FAQs, your content isn't working. Your content should answer your users' questions. So when they have questions, it's not doing its job. And that's oversimplifying it. So let's talk about it a little bit more. FAQs have become a dumping ground. And that's problematic. And here are 4 reasons why. Firstly, questions that start with who, what, when, why, where. They're adding unnecessary words to your content, right? If you look at those long questions in FAQ, you're usually looking for that phrase that comes at the end of the question. What is your return policy? You're looking for return policy, not what is your. So we've got all these extra words we don't need. Questions are not optimized for skimmers and scanners. Usually the answers aren't either. They're usually a long paragraph of text. FAQs tend to hide some of our most important content. Again, we feel like it's important, so we put it in FAQs. I don't know why. We have to stop doing that. And number 4, FAQs duplicate content. And I'm going to show you more about each of these, but that creates more work for you and for your reader. So let's take a look. Here's some FAQs from Loft, the women's clothing retailer. This example illustrates number 2 from the previous slide, right? This is not skimmable, scannable content. They've got this weird sidebar on the left that lists all these topics, which are great. And then they've got these questions on the right with a lot of dense text. It's like a scavenger hunt for your problems, which is super fun, right? When you just realize your pants don't fit, the last thing you want to do is like figure out how you have to go about returning them or how long you have or whatever. No one wants to be sent on a scavenger hunt for information. It's not fun. So there's something else going on here, though. If you look at that first question, it says, what is the return exchange policy? So it's the user asking the question. But then they switch point of view for some reason, and the company starts asking questions. And they start asking me, have a store purchase you need to return? Very strange. So it's super inefficient. Here's Athleta. They do a little bit of a better job. Is it Athleta? I never know. I say Athleta. They list the top customer questions, right, in this shaded area at the top here. And then they use those questions to organize a customer service page. The customer service content itself is well designed. If you look at it, it's skimmable, it's scannable, again, super easy. So that's an interesting model. If you're a business that sells and ships products, a customer service page organized by topic will serve you far better than an FAQ page does. I'm still kind of questioning why those top customer questions are there. But I suspect, going back to Christy's question, that actually has something to do with SEO, or the topic of Christy's question anyway. And I think that as more people use voice technology like Alexa and Siri to search, there might be a reason to keep a list of questions somewhere on your website for search engine purposes. But number 1, like I said it before, it's not my area of expertise. And unless you're Gap Incorporated, Athleta's parent company, I don't think you need to worry about voice search quite yet. Let's look at an FAQ before and after. You'll notice it's a good example of the first reason we talked about not to use FAQs, because we're starting with these question words and adding this length, right? What is the typical length of stay? What forms of transportation are available? But it also illustrates number 3. FAQs often hide some of your most important content. This is another example from CA Human Services. I mentioned them before. They work to improve quality of life for people with ASD and other developmental disorders. They have amazing programs for adults. But when I started working with them, all of that great program info was buried in the FAQs. And not only did it live in the FAQs, but as you can see, it was hidden behind these accordions. So you first had to find the FAQ page under resources, and then you had to click on each one of these accordions to reveal the answer to your question. Again, imagine this parent of an adult child with autism trying to find a program for them to learn job skills or learn about transportation. They're already stressed out and they have to do this much work. It's completely unnecessary. So when we reorganized this website, we pulled this important information out of FAQs and created an entire section for these programs. Now the information is accessible. You can skim and scan it to find exactly what you need quickly. And again, if you can imagine their information architecture at the top, their menu, they had resources, and then under resources was FAQs. They had stuff for professionals, for parents of small children, for parents of adult children. So instead we changed the IA, the information architecture, and we had 4 professionals, for families of people with autism or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head. But again, let's make it easier. Why are we asking so much of people? The fourth reason I ask you not to use FAQs brings us back to Warby Parker. I said nice things about them before, and now I'm going to say something a little critical. Their FAQs drive me crazy. And they're not the only ones. I'm picking on them a little bit. Just it was an easy example to find to share with you guys. When I Google Warby Parker progressive lenses, I get these two different results, and I have to click on both to figure out why, right? I want to compare the information. Well, this one says something, this one says something else. So the help result takes me to FAQs, where I find these chunks of dense text that answer my question, but they require a fair amount of effort from me, right? I see some prices scattered in there. The other result takes me to a page about lenses. It's a little tricky to see here, sorry. But this version is a little bit more helpful, actually, because it has these cool illustrations that show you how progressives work, but it's missing the pricing information. So it's not complete either. I used to work with a designer who always said a click is a commitment. Every time you click, you're making a commitment. So I, as a user, had to make two commitments to compare and evaluate this information, right? So creating a separate FAQ page required more work and more effort from me, the user, but it also requires more effort from the content team at Warby Parker. Every time they update any kind of information about progressive lenses, they have to update it in these two places. That's additional, unnecessary work. And again, neither one of them is complete. The FAQs are missing the cool illustrations. This page is missing the prices. You can visit several places on the page that all talk about the same thing. And ultimately, when I would go back to try to find the information, I didn't find quite the version I was looking for, which again, frustrating experience for a user. Now, I said don't publish FAQs. That doesn't mean you can't use FAQs. You can use FAQs to help you plan and design your content. And here's how you do that. You have your team, or you, if you're in the team, make a list of all the questions you get via email, phone, Insta DM, at cocktail parties, whatever, all the questions you get. You can use those questions to identify topics to create the content your users are looking for. So that might be content about shipping, taxes, questions about your creative process. It depends what you do, what you sell. So I'm not saying don't create that content. By all means do. Just don't hide it in FAQs. So think about what that content really focuses on and make pages that focus on those topics. All right. Before we hit the next two rules, which are the last ones, we're going to go through them pretty quickly. We're going to quickly revisit the definition of content design and what makes it different than copywriting. Again, it's the practice of creating user-centered content informed by research and testing. So let's do our research. Number 9, you can't help your users unless you know what they need. And I know you think you know, but wouldn't it be better to know you know? Don't skip this discovery work. It's really, really important. Erica Hall is the founder of a company called Mule Design. She wrote a book called Just Enough Research. It's a great little volume. She calls research making friends with reality, which is a great way to think of it if you hate the idea of research. She wants us to make friends with reality sooner rather than later. So we don't invest in a bunch of stuff and then find out it's wrong because people aren't clicking, they aren't buying, they aren't engaging. All right, there are two types of research. You probably know this, quantitative and qualitative. When it comes to content, quantitative is stuff like Google Analytics, demographic information about your audience, revenue numbers if you have them, industry trends and reports. It's cold, hard facts. Qualitative research is a little bit squishier. It's surveys, interviews, competitive audits. And remember, an audit is different than an inventory. An inventory counts all the things, but an audit actually judges them as well. It's keyword research, it's content testing, and we'll talk about that next. So here are a few epiphanies that I've had with research on my own very simple website. Some of you probably know it. So Google Analytics showed me that the most popular page on my site is a how-to piece that I wrote about creating smarter content on my blog. It includes some of the points we've talked about today. That's the most popular piece on my entire website. Analytics on LinkedIn, again, quantitative data, showed me that my most popular piece of content on LinkedIn got lots of views, but those views all came from other content designers, not potential customers. So that was really interesting. qualitative research that I've done includes content testing, which showed me that a phrase I was using to describe my services was insulting to potential customers. I mean, not super offensive, but they didn't quite get it and they were a little offended. And the name of my company, Actual Language Arts, actually came from an interview with a client after our first project together. So that's qualitative research that has come back to me. So it all sounds like a lot of work, but in the end, research makes your job easier. And again, probably saves you time and effort if you do it up front. So it shows you how your audience behaves. It reveals what their priorities are. It familiarizes you with the language and keywords they use. And it provides data and evidence to support your content plan. And like Christy was saying, that data and evidence, that's what you can use to get alignment from other stakeholders and to get buy-in from the people that you need to bring along with you. This brings us to our final tip, number 10, test the content. So after you've designed with words, using data, you have to test the content. I love this quote from Sarah Wachter-Becher. She says that designing interface content takes writing skills, sure, but it also takes curiosity about how things work and compassion for the people they need to work for. So the big point here is you're not writing for yourself. You're not writing for your boss. You're writing for your reader. Content testing sounds really complicated, but it's not, and it's super important. So take a look at this tweet, which I love. If you know enough to say it's correct, you know too much to say that it's clear. No one can judge both clear and correct. So if you're a solopreneur, you're definitely too close to your content to judge how well it's working for your intended audience. If you're in PR or marketing and you're working with a subject matter expert, they are too close to their work to make it truly accessible. So you or your SME can decide if the content is correct, right? Yes, this is what we need to say, but you need users to tell you if it's clear. The good news is it's super cheap and fast, and here's what it looks like. These are content tests that I did on my own website. I used a simple methodology that Sarah Richards at Content Design London has written about. The content teams of Capital One have also written about it. Again, if you're interested, ping me and I'll share those links with you. I asked two clients, two people who know me really well. They know my work. They know what I'm good at. They know what I'm not good at. I asked them to look at this content that I was proposing to use on my website. I told them to use a green highlighter for words that were clear and compelling and a yellow highlighter for words that were confusing or that just weren't working for them. There's nothing special about green and yellow. You can use whatever color works for you. You can use your brand colors if you want. You can do this with printed paper in person. In this case, I did both of these via Google Docs, where you can change the highlight color. And after I got the test back, I talked through a few things with each of them so I could revise the content. This didn't cost me a thing other than a few minutes to say thank you via email afterwards. Super simple way. You put this in front of your readers and you say, what is compelling? What is clear? What is confusing or makes you uncomfortable? You can change the words depending upon what you're after, but it's super simple. And I'll add one last thing. This is our very last tip, but my last thought is, I know a lot of you probably work with SMEs, with these subject matter experts who don't like the idea of you simplifying their work. So I would encourage you to share the research, and again, ping me and I can share it with you, that shows that, again, no matter what your reading level, and in fact, the higher your reading level, the more you value simple content. I think that has to do with time, actually. The more scarce your time, the more you value simplicity. And share the research, again, around your own content, and the ones that perform well are hopefully simpler, plainer language, share that. There's a one-liner that Sarah Richards, who I already referred to, uses. She always says, your job is to do the complex. My job is to hide the complexity. So it's a very polite way to say stay in your lane when you're working with someone who wants to make things verbose and awful. But I encourage you to, again, really emphasize that user and always focus on them. So that is our very last tip. Here they are for a quick refresher. Write shorter sentences, use common words, make the important stuff look important, use the first and second person, avoid those hidden verbs, optimize for skimmers and scanners, avoid jargon, don't publish FAQs. Doesn't mean you can't use them, but don't publish them. Do your research and test the content. This is my contact information if you want to take a quick screen grab if you don't already have it. And if we have any other questions, especially on those last three, we're very close to time, but I'm happy to answer anything that you guys have unaddressed still.
All right. Do you offer website copy audits?
I do. I don't, so it's not an inventory. I don't do like a web crawler and inventory pages, but I do audits. I actually call it content coaching. And so I can look at a website and make observations and suggestions, and then prioritize a roadmap of like the low hanging fruit, the stuff that you can change quickly to make the biggest impact. I do that.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think it would be helpful for me, and I'm sure other people here, to know how do you work with clients? Like, what are the types of projects that you take on, and what are ways that we could work with you?
So I don't have a lot of standard offerings. I do have sort of standard services, but so I do everything from, like I said, content coaching. That's sort of the lightest weight thing that I do, where I can look and give you advice, and I give you it as a printed deliverable. Big observations and then sort of an approach to take. That's content coaching. I can also do something like what I kind of loosely call conversation to content. So if you have SMEs or you are a SME and you need something written, I can take a conversation that I generally record and then turn that into 1, 2, or 3 pieces of content or whatever you need based on a conversation that's kind of an interview format. I do complete website redos, and I do those in a few different ways. So I can do an all-day workshop with someone, again, where I make suggestions and then you do the work. I do project-based ones where I do a 2-week sprint where I kind of redo everything in 2 weeks, or I do them on longer retainers where I'm just sort of on people's bench, on their team.
Gotcha.
Per se. Yeah.
Some of the content, some of the questions or comments were, would love to do this for me or with client websites. So typically, if someone's doing like a redesign of their site, you could either do a 1 day and get them the information they need to go do it with their designer or coder or what have you, or work with the team.
Yeah, basically I start with people's budget and requirements, and in working with your budget, I say, here's what I can do for that price to make it work for you. Yeah, and then if people want to do this on their own, again, if you're really just, excited about content design or really want to try to DIY stuff, if you go to my blog, last week, I think I published a post with like my 5 favorite books about content and information architecture, really beginner level stuff to help you practice this and become more familiar with it. 5 easily available books from Amazon, and you can study those and start learning how to do it yourself as well. That's how I learned.
Oh, it's so fascinating. Just wanted to, because you can't see the comments, Erin and Christy both have to jump, but they said that this was awesome and thank you so much. And there was also comments throughout this about how you are a genius. So
awesome. Good.
For later. Cassandra, I had one other question and then we do have to go. Any differing advice for irresistible free offers?
In terms of how you approach the content, I'm not sure I understand that. Yeah, I mean, so you're talking about like kind of the pink spoon sort of thing where you create content that you give away, I think is what Cassandra's talking about. And I'll just give you one quick helpful thing. This is more about strategy than design per se, but I like to use this analogy and clients find it really helpful. Think about these 2 things. You've got a content selfie and a content gift. Okay, a content selfie is like me, where I'm the hero of the story, and a content gift is where I make the client or the customer the hero of the story, and I give them something that's truly useful for them. So my hope is, with this webinar, I gave you a content gift. I taught you these rules. I showed you how to apply them. We talked through them. We answered questions. It's a content gift. A content selfie would be just something that's purely self-promotional and talks about me. When it doesn't necessarily, it's not something that the person who receives the free offer can take and do anything with that helps them. I hope that makes sense. So make sure it's a content gift that you're giving them. It's a checklist they can use to organize their garage. It's a script they can use to talk to their teenager about sex. It's something that is a gift that helps them do something all by themselves.
Those are very specific examples, Kate.
I know. I don't know why. I have no idea. I have no idea. I have 3 teenagers. Good times.
Fantastic. Well, as we're wrapping up, I want to reiterate how people can find information. I know you had said, mentioned a couple links to articles that might be useful in conveying this message to clients or to people that they're working with. And also if people want to connect with you to find out how they can work with you, can you just, is the info on this card right here? Is there any specific?
Yeah, that's it. So I'm Kate at languagearts.xyz. I'm on Instagram as Language Arts Company. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me in any of those places and tell me what you're looking for, and I'll be happy to try to provide a resource that can help you get the job done. And again, go to my blog as well. You'll see a lot of things there that I talked about today. Some of the research, statistics, again, that bookshelf where you can get started to learn how to do all this by yourself as well. It's all there.
Awesome. And like I had said at the beginning, we are going to be saving this replay for our community members to access. And when we share that, we'll make sure to add all the helpful links that Kate has and where you can find more from her. Thank you so much. This is awesome.
Thank you.
Feel like such a college student again, jazzed about like a new major. This is amazing. Christina said this was awesome. I know this was really, really awesome. So thank you. And thank you all for being here. We hope we'll see you again very soon.
Thanks, everybody. Go outside.
Bye.
Bye.